Jasmine may finally be facing the one thing she always seemed convinced would never actually happen. Gino walking away and meaning it. Not threatening to leave. Not cooling off after another explosive fight. Not disappearing for a few hours and coming back when emotions settle down. Actually being done. But here's what makes this fictional situation so much messier. The second Jasmine starts realizing that Gino may truly be ready to end the marriage, Matt does not back away from the drama. He gets closer. And suddenly, this is not just a story about Jasmine and Gino falling apart. It becomes a story about timing, jealousy, emotional replacement, and one uncomfortable question Gino may not be ready to answer. If you really want Jasmine out of your life, why does it bother you so much when another man starts becoming important to her? Because that is the contradiction sitting right in the middle of all this. Gino can say he wants freedom. Jasmine can say she is finally done begging. Matt can say he is only there to support her. But none of their emotions seem nearly that simple. And that is what I want to break down, because the biggest mistake would be treating this like one giant fight that finally destroyed the marriage. The real problem is much deeper. Jasmine and Gino did not get here because of one argument. They got here because they have been repeating the same emotional argument in different forms for what feels like forever. Jasmine wants reassurance. Gino feels pressured. Gino shuts down. Jasmine sees that silence as rejection. So she pushes harder. Gino withdraws even more. And then both of them walk away convinced that the other person caused the entire problem. That cycle matters more than whatever they happen to be fighting about on any particular day. The subject can change. Money, jealousy, trust, intimacy, another person. Something from the past that supposedly should have been settled already. But the emotional pattern stays almost identical. Jasmine says in one form or another, show me that you care. Gino hears, nothing you do will ever be enough.
So he retreats.
Jasmine sees him retreating and thinks, there it is. He does not care. And now both people are reacting to their worst fear. That is why their loudest arguments may not even be the biggest red flag anymore. The biggest red flag is when two people stop believing the next conversation can produce a different result. Once that happens, you are no longer fighting about the problem. You are fighting your history. And that is why Gino becoming calm in this fictional scenario is actually more serious than Gino getting angry. If he were screaming, Jasmine would know how to deal with that. She can scream back. If he were accusing her of something, she could defend herself. If he were jealous, she could challenge him. But what happens when Gino simply says he cannot do this anymore and there is almost no emotion left in his delivery? That changes the whole power dynamic. Because anger still takes energy. Arguing means you still want to be understood. Defending yourself means you still care how the other person sees you. But emotional exhaustion looks different. It sounds quieter. It sounds less dramatic. And sometimes it is much harder to reverse. That is why I think Jasmine would initially struggle to understand what she is hearing. She has lived through enough ups and downs with Gino that another dramatic breakup moment may not immediately feel permanent. In her mind, maybe this is another cycle. They fight. Somebody says it is over. They separate emotionally. Then eventually somebody reaches out. But this time Gino is not negotiating. That is the part that would shake Jasmine. Because her usual emotional tools suddenly stop working. She cannot provoke a reaction if he refuses to react. She cannot turn the argument around if Gino is no longer trying to win the argument. And eventually she has to ask the question she probably never wanted a real answer to. Are you actually talking about divorce? Not another fight. Not another separation. Not another threat. Divorce. And when that answer becomes yes in this fictional storyline, the most revealing part is Jasmine's reaction. Because Jasmine can spend years telling Gino that he does not love her enough, does not reassure her enough, does not fight for her enough, does not make her feel secure enough. But the moment he actually decides to leave, she is shocked. And that contradiction tells us something. Deep down, Jasmine may have believed Gino would always stay. Maybe she thought she could push him away emotionally without ever losing him physically. Maybe she believed their fights were painful but survivable because they had survived so many before. That can create a strange sense of security inside an extremely unstable relationship. The relationship can feel terrible, but as long as both people secretly believe the other one will never actually leave, the chaos still has boundaries. Gino saying, no, I really mean it this time, destroys that boundary. And Jasmine is not only losing the relationship, she is losing the belief that Gino will always come back. That is when heartbreak can turn into suspicion. Because now Jasmine has to ask herself a question viewers would probably be asking too. How long has Gino felt this way? Did he decide this yesterday? Or did he emotionally leave months ago? Was every quiet moment actually him slowly checking out? Was every time he refused to argue evidence that he had already stopped trying? That is where it gets uncomfortable, because the person getting left often experiences the breakup in one devastating moment. The person doing the leaving may have been experiencing it privately for months. And that brings me to something I think viewers would need to be fair about when it comes to Gino. Being emotionally detached at the end of a relationship does not automatically mean you never cared. Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes the person who looks cold today was completely overwhelmed 6 months ago. They just reached the end of their emotional process earlier. So if Gino can still say he loves Jasmine while also believing the marriage needs to end, that is not necessarily a contradiction. It may actually be the most realistic part of the entire situation. Love and compatibility are not the same thing. You can love somebody and still be miserable with them. You can miss somebody and know that going back would restart the exact same cycle. You can care deeply about someone and still realize that the relationship has become emotionally exhausting for both of you. And that would explain why Gino leaving is so confusing for Jasmine. If he hated her, she could understand it. If there were another woman, she could blame that. If there were one massive betrayal, she could point to the exact moment everything broke. But what if the answer is simply that Gino does not believe they work anymore? That is harder to fight. And I think that is exactly why Jasmine might immediately wonder whether somebody else is involved. Because another woman would give her a target. Another woman would give the breakup a simple explanation. Another woman would allow Jasmine to say, "This happened because somebody came between us." But if Gino says there is nobody else, Jasmine has to look at something much more painful. Maybe the marriage itself became the reason he wanted out. And ironically, while Jasmine is searching for evidence that Gino has replaced her, somebody else begins filling the emotional space Gino left behind. Matt. Now, Matt does not even have to make some dramatic romantic move for this to become threatening. That is what makes his role interesting. He only has to listen. That sounds almost too simple, but think about Jasmine's emotional state. If she feels ignored by Gino, then somebody giving her attention suddenly matters. If she feels dismissed, somebody validating her suddenly feels important. If every conversation with Gino becomes defensive, a calm conversation with Matt starts feeling like relief. And emotional triangles often begin right there. Not with a kiss. Not with a confession. With comparison. Jasmine starts noticing how she feels after talking to each man. Talking to Gino leaves her anxious. Talking to Matt leaves her calmer. Gino makes her feel like every conversation could become a fight. Matt makes her feel heard. Gino seems emotionally unavailable. Matt seems present. Now the marriage is not only competing against its own problems. It is being compared to an alternative emotional experience. And that can be incredibly powerful when somebody is already vulnerable. But this is also where Matt deserves scrutiny. Because we cannot automatically make him the hero just because Gino and Jasmine are struggling. If Matt immediately came in attacking Gino, telling Jasmine she deserves better, and making it obvious that he wanted something romantic, viewers would know exactly what to think. But if he stays measured, if he says, "I am not here to attack Gino. I just do not think you should chase someone who has already decided to leave," that is harder to read. It sounds supportive. It sounds mature. And compared with the chaos Jasmine is used to, that emotional stability could become very attractive very quickly. Then Matt tells Jasmine he is going to stand by her. And now the obvious question becomes, why is he this invested? Maybe the answer is completely innocent. Maybe he sees somebody hurting and wants to support her. But a section of viewers would definitely question the amount of emotional energy involved. Because being someone's main source of comfort is not a small role. Long conversations require investment. Constant emotional availability requires investment. Being the person Jasmine calls after another painful interaction with Gino requires investment. So no, we should not jump to the conclusion that Matt has some secret plan. But it is completely fair to ask whether his feelings are 100% platonic. And apparently, Gino would like an answer to that question too. Because the second he realizes Jasmine is leaning on Matt emotionally, suddenly the man who says he wants the marriage to end has a lot of questions. How often do you talk? When did this start? How close are you? Was Matt around before all of this happened? Now that is interesting. Because Gino can call it concern. He can call it respect. He can say it is about boundaries. But Jasmine is going to hear one word. Jealousy. And honestly, I think viewers would split hard on that. Some fans would say, Gino obviously still wants her. Look how bothered he is. Other viewers would say, no. Being jealous does not mean you want the relationship back. And I think the second group has an important point. Jealousy is not always love. Sometimes jealousy is ego. Sometimes it is attachment. Sometimes you do not want someone anymore, but you are still uncomfortable seeing them become important to somebody else. Gino may have imagined divorce as freedom from conflict. He probably did not spend as much time imagining Jasmine laughing with another man, calling another man when she is upset, or eventually building a life that does not include him. Those are very different emotional realities. Wanting distance from someone is not the same as being ready to watch them replace your role. And Jasmine would recognize that immediately, because suddenly she has something she has wanted from Gino for a long time. Proof that he still cares. Not necessarily proof that he wants the marriage, but proof that she can still affect him. And that gives Jasmine leverage. She can say, you cannot tell me you are divorcing me, and then decide who is allowed to comfort me. That is a difficult argument for Gino to answer. Because if he wants the privileges of separation, he has to accept the consequences of separation too. He cannot demand freedom from the relationship while also expecting Jasmine to remain emotionally frozen. But before everybody starts cheering for Jasmine and Matt, there is another question that needs an answer. If Jasmine became completely single tomorrow, would Matt date her? That is where things get dangerous. Because if the answer is an immediate no, maybe his support really is completely platonic. But if Matt hesitates? Now, we know the possibility exists. That does not mean he caused the breakup. It does not mean he manipulated Jasmine. It does not mean there was some secret plan. It simply means his feelings may be more complicated than he wants to admit. And that is exactly where fan reaction would get messy. Some fans would probably say Matt is only doing what Gino refused to do, listen to Jasmine, and make her feel emotionally safe. Another section of viewers would argue that becoming this emotionally close to someone while their marriage is collapsing creates questionable boundaries. And some viewers would probably believe Jasmine herself is not even sure what she wants from Matt. She may genuinely like him. She may also enjoy seeing Gino bothered. Both things can be true. That is what makes this more interesting than a simple love triangle. Nobody has to be a villain. Jasmine can sincerely care about Matt while also using Gino's jealousy as reassurance. Matt can sincerely support Jasmine while slowly developing feelings. Gino can sincerely want the divorce while still struggling to see Jasmine with somebody else. Human beings contradict themselves constantly. And on reality TV, the contradiction usually tells you more than the speech. Jasmine's biggest contradiction comes when she finally admits that some part of her still wants Gino to stop the divorce. That is the vulnerability underneath everything. She can act tough. She can say she is finished chasing him. She can remind him that Matt listens when Gino will not. But underneath all of that is a much more painful fear. What if Gino becomes happier without her? That question would hurt Jasmine more than any legal document. Because if Gino leaves and immediately regrets it, she can still tell herself the relationship was meant to survive. But if Gino leaves and becomes calmer? If he seems healthier? If he looks relieved? Now Jasmine has to confront the possibility that the relationship was not only hurting her, it was hurting him too. And that is brutal. Matt creates a similar problem. Does Jasmine actually want Matt? Or does she want how Matt makes her feel compared with Gino? Those are not the same thing. Rebound relationships can feel incredibly intense because the new person appears to fix everything the previous person got wrong. Your ex ignored you, so somebody texting back feels incredible. Your ex criticized you, so compliments feel like love. Your ex made you anxious, so peace feels like chemistry. But sometimes you are not falling in love with the person. You are falling in love with the relief. And if Matt is emotionally intelligent, he should recognize that. But before he can set boundaries, he and Gino eventually have to deal with the elephant in the room. Gino thinks Matt became too involved too quickly. Matt thinks Gino gave up the right to control Jasmine the moment he decided to leave. Then Gino asks the question everybody has been thinking. Do you have feelings for Jasmine? And Matt gives him the one response Gino probably does not want to hear. Why does it matter if you are divorcing her? That question corners Gino. Because every answer exposes something. If Gino says it does not matter, then why is he confronting Matt? If he says it does matter, Jasmine can ask why he is still ending the marriage. If he says he is only protecting Jasmine, Matt can point out that Jasmine is capable of making her own choices. There is no easy answer. And that is when the emotional triangle finally becomes clear. Gino wants distance without completely accepting the loss. Jasmine wants independence without completely giving up Gino's reassurance. Matt wants to support Jasmine without fully admitting where that emotional connection could lead. Everybody wants two opposite things at the same time. That is why nobody can move forward. Then Jasmine changes the whole dynamic. She stops begging. And this may be more powerful than any fight she could have with Gino. She tells him, if divorce is truly what you want, I am going to accept it. That calm response would probably affect Gino more than screaming ever could, because Jasmine's emotional intensity has always been evidence of attachment. If she is crying, accusing, yelling, demanding answers, Gino knows she is still emotionally centered around him. But acceptance? Acceptance means she may actually build a life without him. That is when the consequences become real. And Jasmine does something else that I think she would need to do before anything could happen with Matt. She asks him directly whether he has been waiting for her marriage to fail. Matt says no. But then he admits something more complicated. He cannot honestly say he has never wondered what could happen between them. Now that changes things. That is not a love confession. But the relationship is no longer emotionally neutral. And suddenly Gino is not jealous of some imaginary possibility. He can see another man becoming genuinely important to Jasmine. This is where a lot of viewers might say, see? Gino only cares because somebody else wants her. But I would be careful with that conclusion. Pain does not automatically mean reconciliation is right. Jealousy does not erase the reasons a relationship failed. Gino could feel terrible seeing Jasmine move forward and still genuinely believe divorce is the healthiest choice. Both emotions can exist at once. And that is why the most important conversation is the one where Matt is removed completely. Just Jasmine and Gino.
No jealousy.
No competition. No proving anything. Jasmine asks whether they were ever truly happy. Gino says yes. And that matters. A failed relationship is not automatically a fake relationship. Two people can love each other deeply and still become awful partners for each other over time. Then Jasmine asks the harder question. When did we stop being those people? And there may not be one answer. Relationships usually do not collapse because of one dramatic moment. They erode. One cruel comment that never gets repaired. One insecurity that turns into resentment. One promise that gets broken. One argument that gets brought back during the next argument. A little less trust. A little more defensiveness. Until two people who once felt safe together begin expecting pain before the conversation even starts. Then Jasmine finally asks the question she actually needs answered. If Matt did not exist, would you still want the divorce? That question determines whether Matt caused the breakup or simply became part of the fallout. And in this fictional scenario, Gino says yes. That may be the most painful answer Jasmine could hear, because now she cannot blame Matt. She cannot blame another woman. She cannot convince herself that somebody stole Gino from her. The problems existed before Matt became emotionally important. Matt may complicate the ending. He did not create the foundation. And strangely, accepting that could be the first step Jasmine needs if she is ever going to move forward. Then Matt gets his real test. Does he immediately move in and try to become the new boyfriend?